The first time they saw her again, the village was wrapped in a soft gray mourning, the kind that made the cobblestones shine and the laundry on the lines hang heavy with mist. She walked slowly up the narrow main street with a small girl's hand inside her own and a worn suitcase tapping against her leg. Heads turned from doorways and shop windows, conversations quieted mid-sentence. This is Stories That Heal the Heart, where we tell quiet human stories about injustice, love, and the power of forgiveness. Here, the people are ordinary, the streets are familiar, and yet the smallest gesture can change everything. These are not tales of heroes far away, but of neighbors we think we know until the truth returns and asks us to look again. If you have ever felt like you did not belong or wished you could erase the way someone once looked at you, this story is for you. If you still believe that kindness can outlive the words that wounded you, stay with me until the end. They used to call her ugly when she was a child. They said it quietly at first, in corners and kitchens, then louder, in schoolyards and on sidewalks, until the word clung to her name like dust on her shoes. She learned to walk with her head down, to stand half hidden behind her mother's skirt whenever she crossed the square, to shrink her laughter so it would not draw more eyes. In a village that remembered everything, they remembered her for the wrong reason. Now she returns not with anger, not with riches, but with a little girl who lifts her face to the pale sky as if rain were a blessing. The child's hair is tied back with a yellow ribbon that catches the light, a small sun moving through the gray. People stare, trying to recognize the woman they once knew, searching for something familiar in the lines around her eyes that they never cared to see before. What they do not know yet is why she has come back, or what she has been carrying all these years when no one was watching. They do not know about the letters sent without a name, the packages that appeared on doorsteps in winter, the quiet calls that kept the lights on in houses that might have gone dark. All they see for now is a woman who should have disappeared, walking calmly down the same street where her childhood ended. This is the story of a girl who grew up wishing she could vanish, and the day she chose instead to return and stand in the open light. It is a story about the damage of careless words, the long echo of shame, and the quiet beauty of a heart that refuses to grow bitter. It is also about a village learning, all at once, what beauty looks like when it finally stands in front of them again. If stories like this remind you that goodness still exists in ordinary places, consider staying close to this channel. Like and subscribe so these voices of hope can reach more hearts that need them. For now, picture her, stopping in the middle of the square, her daughter's fingers tightening around hers, the suitcase resting by her ankle. A window shutter creaks open. A door stands half closed. Faces hover in the space between apology and curiosity. The bells in the small church at the end of the road finish their slow ringing, and the sound fades into a silence that is not empty, but waiting. In that silence, the past and the present meet, and the village leans toward one simple question it never bothered to ask: who is she, now that no one is laughing? She paused at the edge of the square, as if listening for something only she could hear. The village looked almost the same as the morning she left. The bakery door propped open with a stone, the wooden bench beneath the fig tree, the uneven line of houses with chipped paint and curtains fading in the sun. But there was a hush beneath everything, a kind of breath the place seemed to hold while watching her take her first slow steps back into the life she once escaped. She tightened her hand around her daughter's, and the child leaned gently into her side. A breeze drifted through the square, lifting the scent of fresh bread and damp earth, the same fragrance she knew by heart from her childhood. It carried memories she had folded away like forgotten clothes, her mother's hands kneading dough at dawn, her grandmother humming by the stove, Her own small footsteps rushing through this very street before she learned to fear the sound of her name said with laughter that wasn't laughter at all. Across from her, the old cafe was open. The tables under the awning were already occupied, though no one drank their coffee now. They stared. Some pretended not to. A spoon clinked against a glass, and then went still. A woman in a blue dress pressed her fingertips to her mouth, whispering something to her friend. Near the bakery, two men paused mid-conversation, one adjusting his cap as if that simple movement could hide the shame settling in his eyes. The girl they remembered had lived behind shadows. The woman before them moved in the open, shoulders relaxed, gaze steady. That quiet dignity unsettled something in the villagers more than beauty or success ever could. They had carved a version of her in their minds long ago, and now that figure stood undone right in front of them. Her daughter tugged her sleeve and pointed toward the fountain where pigeons gathered along the rim. The little girl's hair ribbon, bright yellow like morning sunlight, fluttered lightly. The woman knelt, smoothing a stray curl behind the child's ear. Her voice was soft, the words too low for anyone else to hear. But the tenderness of the gesture struck the people watching more deeply than any speech could. Behind her, the suitcase rested on the stones, worn, scuffed, barely holding together. People wondered what she carried. Clothes, keepsakes, perhaps just enough to start over. They did not know it contained something far heavier than belongings. The years she spent rebuilding herself beyond the reach of their cruelty, and the grace she held now, not because of them, but in spite of them. As she rose, her eyes drifted toward the old lamppost beside the bakery. A small white scratch marked the base of it, almost invisible unless someone knew where to look. When she was 9, a group of children had pushed her against it, calling her a name she never repeated. She remembered the metallic taste of fear, the sting in her knees, the echo of laughter fading as they ran. She remembered going home that day and sitting on the floor beside her grandmother, who placed a warm cloth on her bruises and whispered, "The world is loud, child, but love can be louder." She swallowed, feeling the weight of that memory settle somewhere deep but steady. Her daughter gazed up at her with wide, trusting eyes, unaware of the ghosts that lingered in corners and alleyways, watching her mother with a mixture of regret and disbelief. A sound broke the quiet. The bakery doorbell chimed, and an elderly woman stepped out carrying a tray of fresh rolls. She froze when she saw them, mother and daughter standing there like a small flame in the soft gray morning. Her eyes widened, then softened with something fragile. She clutched the tray to her chest and whispered the woman's name, though it barely came out as breath. The younger woman nodded politely, a quiet acknowledgement that held no bitterness. She turned to continue walking, but a child ran across her path, a boy no older than 7, with cheeks flushed from play and a toy truck in hand. He stopped abruptly in front of her, staring at her daughter, intrigued by the bright ribbon. For a moment, the two children looked at each other, curious, innocent, free of the weight that once filled this village like fog. The boy's mother rushed over, apologizing under her breath. She pulled him away gently, but the boy looked back, offering a small, shy wave. The little girl waved back. That simple gesture rippled through the morning like the first warm breeze after a long winter. A man toward the cafe lowered his head, shaking it slowly as if seeing a truth he had refused to acknowledge for years. He murmured something. No one heard the words, but whatever they were, they carried the heaviness of regret. Her steps took her past the tailor's shop where a dusty mannequin stood half-dressed behind cracked glass. She paused again. When she was 10, her mother had saved coins to buy her a dress from that shop for the school festival. She'd worn it only once before the whispers followed her into the classroom. Before one girl tugged at the seam and made a joke that sent everyone laughing until the dress felt like a costume she didn't deserve. She remembered hiding in the school bathroom, washing her face with cold water, praying no one would see the redness of her eyes. Her mother had waited at the gate that day, hands clasped tightly, searching through the crowd for a daughter who tried so hard to stay invisible. She walked on, her daughter humming softly beside her, tapping her suitcase with each step. The sound echoed against the buildings, a rhythmic reminder of how far she had come. Then, like a small petal drifting into the scene, a woman stepped out of the nearby flower stall holding a bunch of daisies. She placed one on the wooden counter and then hesitated before setting another beside it. She glanced at the returning woman, her expression tentative, almost pleading. She looked as though she wanted to offer a flower but lacked the courage. Instead, she turned and retreated inside, leaving the daisies trembling lightly in the breeze. A man sweeping the steps of the post office paused with his broom mid-air. His shoulders sagged. He had once stopped her on those same steps when she was a teenager, blocking her path just long enough to deliver a remark that left her unable to look anyone in the eyes for days. Now he watched her walk with a quiet shame that pressed into the stone beneath his feet. The woman kept her pace slow, letting her daughter explore the edges of each moment. The child pointed at a cat lounging near a bench, then at the baskets of fruit outside the grocer's door, then toward the bakery again, giggling when a pigeon fluttered too close. Her mother's face softened each time the little girl laughed. That softness was something the villagers had never given her space to show. They had only seen what they chose to see, an easy target, a punchline, a mirror for their own insecurities. They never saw the quiet strength in the way she helped her mother carry water from the well, or the tenderness with which she brushed her grandmother's hair at night. She reached the far side of the square where the old fountain stood. The water trickled down its stone sides, catching the light in shades of silver and white. Years ago, she would come here alone, listening to the water to drown out the voices that followed her everywhere. She would trace shapes on the rim of the fountain with her fingertip, hoping the world would soften long enough for her to breathe. Her daughter tugged again. "Mama," she whispered, pointing at the water. The woman smiled and lifted the child onto the rim, steadying her small legs. The little girl dipped her fingers into the cool surface and giggled. That sound, light, clear, unaffected, floated across the square and touched the hearts of people who once believed beauty was something measured only by faces. A man near the fountain shifted uncomfortably. He had been one of the loudest voices in the past, the kind that made insults burn hotter. Now he looked as though someone had peeled back the years and set a mirror before him. He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes fixed on the child at the fountain. He seemed to want to speak, but the words stayed trapped beneath the weight of who he once was. The woman held her daughter close, her chin resting lightly on the child's head. She could feel dozens of eyes still on her, but none of them pierced her anymore. Her grandmother's blessing had shielded her long before she ever knew she needed protection. "Go find the place where your heart can breathe," her grandmother had said the night she left. "And when you return with light." She had not understood the meaning back then. She understood now. As she turned to face the village again, a shaft of sunlight broke through the thinning clouds. It struck the yellow ribbon in her daughter's hair, making it glow against the soft gray morning. The villagers stared at the unexpected warmth filling the square. It seemed to settle around mother and child, a quiet radiance that had nothing to do with wealth or beauty and everything to do with grace. And for the first time, the village realized it was not her appearance that shamed them. It was the memory of how they had once treated a little girl who only wanted to be seen with kindness. Long before she ever carried a suitcase out of the village, long before a yellow ribbon tied in her daughter's hair caught the morning light, she was simply a quiet child in a kitchen that always smelled of bread and soap and wood smoke. The house sat at the end of a narrow lane, its walls worn smooth by years of wind and hands brushing past. In the evenings when the sun slipped behind the hills, the windows would glow a soft orange, and from the outside it looked as if the house were holding its breath, keeping something tender and fragile safe inside. Inside, her grandmother's hands never stopped moving. They shelled beans, folded towels, sliced bread, and mended seams with a kind of steady patience that seemed to slow time. Her mother, younger and already tired in ways no one saw, moved between stove and sink, humming half-finished songs that she never remembered the words to. The girl learned to read the rhythm of their steps, the way her grandmother's chair creaked near the window, the way her mother's shoulders rose and fell with each sigh. This kitchen was the first place she knew she was more than the word whispered behind her back. At the small wooden table with its chipped edge and faded tablecloth, she was a pair of eager eyes, a set of small, capable hands. Her grandmother would tap the table gently and say, "Show me how you make the dough softer than clouds." And the girl would press her fingers into the flour, loving the way it clung to her skin and turned her world white. On mornings before school, the sound of the village woke around them, roosters crowing, footsteps on stones, the distant murmur of voices rising from the square. As the girl braided her own hair in front of the crooked mirror, she would hear laughter outside the window, sharp, loud, too bright for that early hour. It took her a while to understand that not all laughter sounded the same. Some laughter bent toward joy, some bent toward cruelty. The first time she noticed the difference, she was no more than 7. She had stood in the doorway, clutching a small cloth bag with her books inside, while her mother tied the apron around her waist for work at the laundry. Her grandmother wiped her hands on her skirt and knelt so they were eye level. "Look at me," the old woman said softly. The girl did. In her grandmother's eyes, she saw no judgment, no discomfort as they moved over the uneven lines of her face. She saw only warmth and a kind of fierce tenderness. "You are not what they say," her grandmother murmured. "You are more than any word someone throws at you because they are afraid of their own reflection." The girl did not fully understand the meaning, but she remembered the way her grandmother cupped her cheek, the roughness of her fingers and the softness of her gaze. That memory would follow her long after the village streets were far behind. At school, everything was sharper. The desks, the pencils, the way children's eyes flicked up and down as if measuring and weighing each other. The teacher's voice droned through the lessons, and whenever she called names, some carried a certain lightness. Others, like the girls, drew muffled snickers from the back of the classroom. She tried to shrink inside her clothes when she walked to the blackboard. Each step felt louder than the last, each second stretching long enough for whispers to fill the silence. She wrote numbers with careful strokes, though sometimes her hand trembled. When she turned back to her seat, she could feel the sting of stares following her like bees. One day, a boy at the back of the room made a face as she passed his desk, twisting his features into a cruel imitation of hers. The others laughed. The sound was sharp, broken glass in the air. The teacher frowned and said nothing. The girl kept walking, every part of her trying not to run. That afternoon, as she crossed the square to go home, a group of older children clustered near the fountain. She could have taken another path, but it would have meant a longer walk, and her mother needed her back quickly to help. So she straightened her shoulders and kept going, holding her books tight to her chest. They saw her coming. Laughter shifted. grew. One of them called out a name that was not hers, a word that clung to the surface of her skin like cold oil. Another repeated it, louder. Someone imitated the way she walked, exaggerating every step. She fixed her eyes on the ground, counting the stones beneath her feet one by one. When she reached the lamppost near the bakery, as she always did, a hand pushed between her shoulder blades, small but mean, sending her forward. Her book slipped, pages fanned out, and she stumbled against the metal base. Pain shot up her arm, but she swallowed a cry. There were giggles, a chorus of mock sympathy. One girl leaned close enough that the girl could smell peppermint on her breath. "Why do you even come out?" she whispered. "Do you like being seen?" The words sank deeper than the bruise growing along the girl's side. She spent the rest of the walk home trying to smooth her expression so her mother would not worry. That evening, a light rain began to tap against the kitchen window. The girl sat at the table with a half-eaten piece of bread in front of her, tracing the pattern of crumbs. Her mother watched as she kept pushing the bread around instead of eating. "What happened?" her mother asked gently. "Nothing," the girl whispered. Her grandmother looked up from her chair by the window where she was darning a worn sock. The rain created a steady rhythm behind her, the sound of 1,000 soft fingers tapping the glass. "Rain does not fall for nothing," the old woman said quietly. "Neither do those shoulders drop for no reason." The girl hesitated, then shook her head. She wanted to protect them both from the cruelty of the day, as if silence could build a shield. But later, when she lay awake in bed listening to the rain slide down the roof, she felt words pressing against her chest like water behind a dam. She started a secret habit then. Whenever the house fell quiet and the lamps were turned low, she would take a worn notebook from beneath her pillow and open to its last page. In it, she wrote the things she could not say out loud. She never wrote their names, only impressions, small shards of how each day felt. Today they laughed when I answered a question. Today they moved their chairs away from me. Today the teacher looked away. Sometimes after writing, she would turn back through the pages, reading her own heart. Then she would take the eraser from the chunky pencil her grandmother gave her and slowly rub away the words. Bits of rubber gathered on the paper like gray snow. When the page was almost clean, she would blow gently, watching the dust float away. It was her way of refusing to let their cruelty become permanent ink. Even then, there were moments the village could not steal from her. On market days, when the stalls filled the square with colors and voices, she loved to stand by her grandmother's side, watching people trade stories along with vegetables and bread. She noticed the way someone's eyes softened when they spoke about their children, the way a hand lingered on another's shoulder in comfort. She saw kindness in flashes, small and bright, and she tucked each one into the quietest part of herself. Her dreams were simple. She wanted to work with books, to spend her days inside a library or a school where the only thing that mattered was the way a sentence could open a window in the mind. She imagined shelves stretching farther than she could see, the smell of paper and ink, the soft murmur of turning pages. In those dreams, no one pointed or laughed. People came to her for answers, and she gave them gently. She once tried to tell her teacher that she loved reading more than anything. She stayed after class, clutching her notebook, waiting by the desk while everyone else filed out. The teacher glanced up, tired and rushed. "Yes?" "I finished the reading list," the girl said softly. "And the books from last year, too." The teacher raised her eyebrows, then sighed. "That is good," she said. "You should focus on being presentable as well." Her eyes flicked over the girl's face, and something like discomfort passed through her gaze before she looked away. Education is not everything. The girl nodded as if she understood, though she did not. She left the classroom with the distinct feeling that she had reached for something and been told her hands were not allowed to touch. That night she wrote in her notebook again, then erased it, pressing the eraser too hard and tearing the page. As the years moved, the village learned to treat their cruelty as habit. Words slipped out of mouths with the casualness of greetings. At the bakery, someone would comment on her presence in a tone that invited others to agree. At the grocer, teenagers mimicked her posture. At church, whispers skittered across pews. And though no one said anything directly to her, she felt the weight of it every time she bowed her head. Still, there were pockets of gentleness. Her grandmother, always. Her mother, who would brush the girl's hair with slow strokes as if smoothing away the day, humming the same incomplete songs. Once a younger child from the neighborhood sat beside her on the steps outside the house, pressing a small wilted flower into her palm. "I found it on the road," the little boy said. "I think it is still beautiful." She stared at the petal edges, browned by sun and dust, at the way the stem bent but did not break. She kept the flower pressed between the pages of a book for weeks, long after its shape flattened and its color faded, because it reminded her that even something stepped on could still be offered with love. She developed a habit of walking home by a longer route, taking the back alleys where laundry swayed between buildings and cats lounged on windowsills. She liked the sound of her footsteps echoing in narrow spaces, the way her thoughts filled the quiet. If she passed by the square, she would time it so the sun had already begun to set, when shadows grew long and people were too tired to throw words like stones. Whenever it rained, she felt a small relief. Rain blurred edges, softened faces, gave her an excuse to walk quickly with her head down, focusing on the rhythm of drops hitting the ground. She would arrive home damp but somehow calmer, as if the sky had taken some of the sharpness from the day. The turning point did not come in one dramatic moment, but in a series of small scenes that gathered weight. One afternoon, standing in the crowded square, she watched a group of villagers mock a woman from another town for the clothes she wore, for the way her accent sounded. The girl recognized the expression on the stranger's face, the mix of embarrassment and confusion, of wanting to leave and not having anywhere else to go. She felt anger rise, hot and immediate, but it was not the kind that wanted to shout. It was the kind that wanted to change something deeper, something that had taught these people that mockery was a game. She went home that day with her heart pounding, and her grandmother's blessing echoing in her mind, long before it was ever spoken aloud. As she grew older, she began helping her mother at the laundry more often. She learned how to scrub collars, how to remove stains, how to hang clothes just so they dried without harsh lines. People's lives passed through her hands in cloth form, work shirts, dresses for celebrations, uniforms that smelled of metal and oil. She noticed how differently people treated her when they did not know she was the same girl they had mocked at school. Once, a woman dropped off a bag of linens and smiled as she thanked them. "You do such careful work," the woman said. "I can feel the care in every piece." The girl swallowed the urge to look up fully. If the woman recognized her, would the compliment still stand? At night, her dreams began to include not only books and shelves, but small acts of repair. A shirt mended before a job interview. A table set with clean cloth for a family just holding on. A village learning, piece by piece, to look at each other differently. She did not yet know how she would ever leave, but a seed of possibility had rooted itself quietly inside her. Then came the day of the worst humiliation. It began like any other market morning. The square buzzing, vendors calling, children running between stalls. The girl walked carefully with a basket on her arm, intending to buy flour and a few vegetables her mother had listed. She kept close to the edges where shadows hugged the buildings. Near the fountain, laughter rose louder than everything else. When she turned, she saw a small crowd gathered around a boy holding something above his head. At first, she could not see what it was. Then she caught the glint of familiar fabric, her scarf. The one her grandmother had sewn for her, stitching small patterns along the edge, each thread a quiet prayer. The boy dangled it like bait, while another imitated the way she walked, shoulders hunched, eyes down. A girl pointed at the scarf and said a word the whole village had long ago attached to her, a label she never chose. The crowd laughed. Someone noticed her in the corner of their eye and nudged the others. Heads turned. The boy holding the scarf looked up, saw her, and smirked. The moment stretched. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. The scarf twisted in the air like something alive trying to escape his grasp. She wanted to run forward, to snatch it back, to scream that it was hers and that it meant more than they could possibly understand. But her feet rooted to the cobblestone. Her eyes flicked toward the bakery, the lamppost, the school window reflecting the scene. Every place that had witnessed a smaller version of her endured the same kind of cruelty. Only now she was older, and the shame hit more deeply, because she now understood how deliberate it all was. Someone in the crowd made a joke about how even the scarf looked better without her in it. The laughter that followed was not as loud as it used to be, but it was enough. The sound skimmed across the square like stones across water, hitting her from every side. She could feel her mother's invisible gaze on her, though her mother was miles away at the laundry. She imagined her grandmother's hand still sewing, unaware that the thing she had created with love was being torn apart in front of the entire village. In that moment, something inside the girl did not break. It shifted. Like a bone that had been healing crooked for years, finally snapping into a place where it could grow straight. Her eyes lifted from the stones to the faces. She saw not monsters, but people. People whose laughter was too easy, whose hearts were half asleep. She stepped forward, one measured step after another, until she stood close enough to see the boy's uncertainty flicker. No one had expected her to move toward the cruelty. They expected her to shrink. "May I have it back?" she asked quietly. Her voice was calm, steady as water. The boy coughed out a small laugh, glancing at his friends for support, but something in the air had shifted. Not everyone was laughing. One or two looked away, suddenly fascinated by the ground. A woman at a nearby stall shook her head almost imperceptibly. The boy shrugged and dropped the scarf. It landed in a shallow puddle by the fountain, the stitched edges soaking up muddy water. The girl bent slowly, her fingers brushing the stones as she picked it up. For a second she held it there, dripping, the threads heavy with what it had just witnessed. She could have screamed, or cried, or begged. Instead, she straightened, wrapped the wet scarf around her hand, and walked away. Each step echoed differently this time. The laughter resumed behind her, but it sounded thinner, less certain. That night, sitting at the kitchen table while rain returned to the village with its soft, steady tapping, she laid the scarf flat and washed it carefully in a basin. Her mother watched silently. Her grandmother, eyes cloudy with age but still sharp with understanding, sat beside her. "They do not see what they are doing to themselves," the old woman said. "One day, child, you will leave this place. Not because you are running away, but because your heart deserves a wider sky." The girl looked at the scarf, at the pattern of small flowers her grandmother had stitched. She traced them with a fingertip. "And if I come back?" she asked. Her grandmother smiled sadly. "Then come back with light," she answered. The question lingered in the girl's mind like the echo of a bell long after it stops ringing. She lay awake listening to the rain again, but this time she did not reach for her notebook. She simply stared at the ceiling and began to imagine another life, not one where she hid, but one where her kindness could stretch farther than the streets that knew only her nickname. From that night on, every small cruelty seemed to push her toward a quiet decision. She worked harder at the laundry, saved every coin she could. She read anything she could get her hands on. She learned about other towns, other cities where no one knew her name, where her face would be just one among many. Not something to discuss, but something to pass without comment. She also began to notice something else. People who were kind without anyone asking them to be. The old man who fed stray cats behind the cafe. The boy who held the church door open for an elderly woman every Sunday. The woman from the flower stall who started leaving a small daisy on the corner of her stand whenever she saw the girl pass. These moments were like tiny lanterns, faint but undeniably present. Years later, when she would walk back into that same square with a yellow ribbon glowing in her daughter's hair, she would remember each of these scenes. They were the quiet proof that the village had always carried the possibility of better within it, even while it chose again and again to turn away. For now, though, she was still only a girl with a washed scarf drying near the stove, a heart full of bruises and a grandmother's blessing resting like a seed just under the surface, waiting for the day it would be called to bloom. The morning she finally left the village began with a silence so complete it felt as if the world were holding its breath for her. The sky was pale and soft, streaked with early light, and the hills beyond the fields looked washed in silver. She stood in the doorway of the small house, her suitcase by her feet, her grandmother's hands resting on her shoulders. Her mother wiped her eyes discreetly with the corner of her apron, trying not to let tears fall where the girl could see. She had packed very little, 2 dresses, the scarf her grandmother had repaired so many times it was more thread than fabric, a small bundle of letters she had written to no one, and a book with a cracked spine that she had read so often its pages felt like skin. The suitcase clicked shut with a sound that echoed in her chest, final, trembling, but true. Her grandmother stepped in front of her, lifting the girl's chin gently. "You go where your heart can stretch," she whispered. "Go where the sky doesn't press down on you." Her mother kissed her forehead, her breath warm and unsteady. "Come back only when you want to," she said, "not when the world forces you to." The girl nodded, though she could barely trust her voice to answer. She looked once more around the kitchen, the table, the window, the uneven floorboards she knew by heart, and then stepped outside into the cool morning. The village was waking slowly. Smoke curled from a few chimneys, and the distant sound of a rooster cut through the stillness. She kept her eyes ahead, not wanting to see the old lamppost or the fountain or the cafe where words had once chased her like shadows. The suitcase rattled against the stones, and the sound felt like a marker with each step. Leaving, leaving, leaving. A few villagers watched from their windows. Some pretended not to see her, turning back to their morning routines. Others stared openly, curious or indifferent or something in between. The same group that had once gathered near the fountain to mock her now stood motionless, surprise flickering across their faces. They had never imagined she would leave. Not like this, not without breaking, not without begging for a different ending. She kept walking. At the edge of the village, where the narrow road met the fields, she turned for the first time. Her mother and grandmother stood framed in the doorway, small against the pale dawn. Her grandmother raised her hand slowly, and the girl raised hers in return. Neither moved for a long moment. Then the girl turned again and stepped into the open world beyond the village, where the path curved toward places she had only seen in her dreams. As the village receded behind her, the weight on her shoulders shifted. The silence allowed her thoughts to unfurl like pages long kept shut. She imagined cities with tall buildings, libraries with shelves that seemed infinite, people whose eyes didn't narrow the moment they met her face. She imagined a place where she didn't have to walk with her head bent or her shoulders tight. A place where she could simply exist. She walked for hours. Sometimes she heard distant birds, sometimes only her own breath filled the quiet. When she reached the crossroads at the base of the hill, she sat on a wooden bench and ate a piece of bread her mother had packed. It tasted of home and endings. A wagon approached from the east, pulled by a tired horse and driven by a man with kind eyes. He slowed when he saw her. "Heading somewhere?" he asked. She nodded, gripping the handle of her suitcase. "Come on then," he said, shifting to make space beside him. "Road is long, but longer if you walk alone." She hesitated only a moment before climbing aboard. The man didn't ask her name, and she didn't offer it. They rode in comfortable quiet as the road stretched forward, bordered by fields that shimmered in the morning sun. For the first time, she felt the sky widen above her, as if the world had opened a window just for her to breathe. The man dropped her at the next town, wishing her luck with a wave. She thanked him and continued on foot, her heart beating with a strange mixture of fear and freedom. The streets here were different, busier, louder, filled with people who did not glance twice at her. She could melt into the flow, unnoticed, unjudged. The anonymity was a kind of balm she had never known. She found work first in a bakery. The owner, a quiet woman with salt gray hair, taught her how to slice bread evenly, how to knead dough with consistent pressure, how to greet customers with a smile. The customers barely looked at her face. They asked for loaves, pastries, and the warm rolls she placed carefully into paper bags. It was the first place she began to understand that she did not have to defend her existence. From the bakery, she moved to a second job in the evenings, helping a seamstress who repaired clothes for half the town. She learned to thread needles quickly, to match fabrics, to mend torn hems with invisible stitches. The seamstress often hummed as they worked, a low melody that reminded the girl of her own mother. In the small moments between tasks, the seamstress would tell stories about her customers, joys, sorrows, births, losses, all without judgment. "You fix more than cloth," the seamstress told her once. "You give things a second life." The words lingered with her long after. At night, she lived in a small rented room above a market. Through the thin walls, she heard footsteps, laughter, sometimes arguing, sometimes music. The noise felt like company. She would sit by the window, watching the glow of lanterns along the street, imagining letters she might one day send back home. But she never wrote them. Not yet. The hurt was still too fresh, and she wanted to return one day not with explanations, but with proof of who she had become. Over time, she saved every coin she could. She stopped by the library on her rare afternoons off, wandering through aisles stacked with books that smelled of dust and ink. The librarian, a gentle man with soft eyes, noticed how she lingered with her fingertips brushing spines. "You like the quiet," he said once. She nodded, unsure if he expected more. "Quiet people read the world differently," he said, handing her a book. "Maybe that is why stories belong to them first." She read late into the night, sometimes until her candle sputtered low. Each story widened something in her chest, a kind of internal horizon. Words became her companions, her courage, her way of stitching together a version of herself untouched by the cruelty she had fled. Months passed, then years. She moved to a larger city, found work caring for children, then teaching them to read. Children did not judge the way adults did. They listened with open hearts, asked endless questions, and stared at her not with fear or mockery, but with curiosity and trust. She found a piece of herself there, something gentle and sturdy. One afternoon after class, a little girl with soft brown eyes slipped a folded paper into her hand. "It's for you," the child whispered before running off. Inside was a drawing, two figures holding hands beneath a sun with long golden rays. One figure had hair like hers, the other had a ribbon. Scrawled beneath it were 3 words in crooked letters, "You are kind." She kept the drawing. She kept it the way she kept her grandmother's blessing, tucked deep where no cruelty could touch it. She built a life in the city, not wealthy, not easy, but honest, full of work that mattered. She became the person she had once imagined when staring at the ceiling on rainy nights. Someone who lifted others quietly without expecting praise. She wrote letters anonymously to families who needed help, sent small packages during winter to those without enough food. She paid the electricity bill for an older woman who lived downstairs when she saw the lights flicker. She taught children to read after hours when she realized their parents could not afford lessons. She never signed her name. She learned that beauty lived in these small acts, unnoticed, uncelebrated, but powerful. Beauty was in the way someone's face softened after receiving kindness they did not expect. It was in the way a child's hand reached for hers, trusting her without question. It was in the way her own heart expanded, no longer compressed by the weight of the village she had outgrown. And then, one spring morning, she learned she was going to become a mother. She sat at the edge of her bed, the light streaming through the window in warm ribbons, her hands resting over the new quiet life growing inside her. She felt something she had not felt in years. Fear? Yes, but also a fierce determination. She would give her child a world wider than the one she knew, a world with laughter that did not wound, a world where kindness was the first language. When the baby was born, a girl with soft curls and bright eyes, the woman held her close, inhaling the scent of her skin, feeling the small heartbeat against her chest. She whispered a promise into the newborn's ear. "You will never carry the weight I carried. You will walk with light." And she meant it with every part of her. She raised her daughter gently, guiding her steps along park paths, showing her how to stroke the petals of flowers without crushing them, how to share food with those who needed it, how to listen with full attention. The child grew with a brightness that made even strangers smile. She had inherited her mother's softness, but none of her burdens. Her laugh was quick, her trust easy, her love instinctive. One day, while they sat on a bench near the river, the little girl pointed at a bird with broken feathers by the water. "Mama," she whispered, "it looks sad." The woman knelt beside her, careful not to scare the bird. "Then we will be gentle," she said. They brought water in a small cup. They waited. They wrapped the bird in a soft cloth. The girl stroked its wing with careful fingers. When the bird finally flew again days later, the little girl clapped, her joy bright as morning. "We helped," she said proudly. Her mother watched her, tears pricking her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, "you helped." It was moments like these that shaped the decision she had avoided for years. The village that raised her had not changed, but she had. And now, she had something to return with. Not to prove anything, not to seek forgiveness, but to show her daughter where she had come from and who she had become despite everything. And so, one dawn, with a yellow ribbon tied in her child's hair and a suitcase filled not with fear but with the life she had built, she stepped onto the road that would lead her home. When the village finally appeared again in the distance, its rooftops clustered like familiar thoughts she had tried to file away, she felt her daughter's small hand tighten around her fingers. The child looked up at her with a quiet question in her eyes, one she did not need to voice. The woman smiled softly and gave a reassuring squeeze. "Almost there," she whispered, and the girl nodded, her yellow ribbon fluttering in the wind like a small flame guiding them forward. The closer they came, the more the landscape shifted from memory into presence. The field she once crossed as a child stretched wide on either side, dotted with wildflowers and humming with insects. The air smelled of earth and ripening grain, and the sound of distant bells drifted toward them, faint but steady. She felt the echo of her younger self walking these same paths with smaller steps, carrying burdens too heavy for her age. Her daughter began to skip, swinging their joined hands, humming a tune she had invented earlier that morning. The woman let herself be pulled slightly off rhythm, her stride adjusting to the child's lightness. She wondered, not for the first time, how a heart that had once been so bruised could have softened enough to raise such a gentle soul. The thought warmed her more than the sun. As they reached the stone archway marking the entrance to the village, the woman paused. Her breath caught, not in fear, but in a recognition that felt like standing at the threshold of 2 lifetimes. Her daughter tugged again. "Mama," she exhaled slowly. "Just taking a moment," she said. The girl smiled and swung their joined hands once more. They stepped through. The streets woke with the morning's rhythm, just as they had when she was a child. Doors creaked open, roosters crowed from unseen backyards, and somewhere a dog barked with bored insistence. A few people swept their doorsteps, their movements slow and habitual. None of them noticed her at first. She walked quietly, letting her senses absorb the textures she had once avoided. The uneven stones beneath her shoes, the smell of soap from the laundry, the rustling of curtains behind half-open windows. Then someone looked up. A woman, carrying a basket of onions, stepped into the street, saw her, and froze. The basket tilted slightly in her hands. The woman blinked once, twice, her expression shifting from disbelief to a dawning awareness that spread across her face like a shadow pulling back. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Instead, she nodded, small, uncertain, before disappearing into her doorway. More faces appeared. A man leaning on a broom straightened, his brows knitting together as if trying to reconcile the woman before him with the memory he had preserved for years. An elderly couple paused mid-conversation, their eyes widening, hands hovering in midair. A group of teenagers, too young to know her but old enough to absorb the whispers of their parents, nudged each other subtly as she walked past. She felt their eyes but not their weight. Her daughter, oblivious to the past threading itself back into the present, stopped to inspect a stray cat lounging in a patch of sun. The woman crouched beside her, stroking the cat gently. The cat lifted its head, blinking slowly, unbothered by the attention. A small detail, but it steadied her. It reminded her that not everything here carried the echo of old wounds. As they reached the square, the center of her old life, the morning seemed to hold its breath again. The fountain murmured softly, its water clear as glass. A baker placed fresh loaves in a window, their warm scent drifting toward her. A few people stood frozen, as if caught between their daily routine and the shock of seeing someone they believed had disappeared into the world forever. Her daughter tugged her sleeve, eyes shining. "Mama, look! Birds!" Pigeons hopped around the fountain, pecking crumbs left behind by early visitors. The little girl approached them slowly, giggling when one fluttered in surprise. A man sitting at a nearby table watched her, then glanced at the woman. His expression twisted slightly, not in disgust, as it might have years ago, but in a muted discomfort born of guilt he did not dare name. The woman met his gaze briefly. She felt no bitterness, only the gentle coolness of distance. Whatever he remembered of her belonged to a different lifetime. They continued across the square. The tailor's shop looked smaller than she remembered. Its window was still cracked in the same corner, and inside stood the same mannequin, though the dress draped over it had changed. The woman paused, memories rising uninvited. The tug of fingers at the seam of her dress, laughter reverberating through her skull. The feeling of wanting to vanish beneath the floorboards. But the memory did not sting as sharply now. It was like touching a scar she no longer feared. Her daughter looked up at the mannequin with curiosity. "Mama, why doesn't she have a face?" The woman smiled softly. "Some things don't need a face to be useful," she said. They reached the bakery next. The smell of warm bread tightened her throat with a sudden ache, not of pain, but of remembering how her mother used to save her the smallest end piece, the one with the softest crumb. The bakery's door creaked open, and an older woman stepped out carrying a tray of rolls. Her hair was whiter now, her back slightly stooped. When she saw them, she stopped mid-step. The tray trembled in her hands. A roll nearly slipped off the edge, but she caught it just in time. Her eyes traveled over the woman's face, searching for the child she once knew and perhaps tried, in her own quiet way, to protect. Her lips parted. "It's really you," she whispered. The woman gave a small, respectful nod. "Hello?" A tremor of emotion crossed the older woman's face. She swallowed hard. "You look, well." "I am," the woman said gently. Her daughter stepped forward. "We're visiting," she added cheerfully, as if announcing a grand adventure. The baker's eyes softened with something that bent towards sorrow and relief at once. "Well," she said quietly, "you're welcome. Truly." They walked on. The flower stall came next. The same woman who once left daisies on the corner of her counter, a small act of rebellion against the village's cruelty, stood arranging fresh blossoms in vases. She looked up when she heard footsteps, saw them, and froze with a daisy stem between her fingers. The expression that crossed her face was not shock, but recognition, followed quickly by remorse. She set the daisy down slowly, as though any sudden movement might break the moment. When she stepped forward, her voice trembled. "I always wondered where you went." The woman smiled. "Somewhere quiet." The flower seller nodded. "You deserve that." Her daughter reached for a flower, one of the yellow ones that matched her ribbon. The seller hesitated, then handed it to her with careful fingers. "For you," she said. The little girl beamed. As they reached the far end of the square, a figure emerged from the shadows near the fountain, the boy who had once dangled her scarf in front of a laughing crowd. He was no longer a boy. His shoulders were broader, his face unshaven, but the shape of him was unmistakable. He watched her with an expression twisted by years of regret. For a long moment, no one moved. He opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed. I didn't think you'd ever come back," he said finally. She stood calmly, her daughter holding her hand. "I didn't think so either," she said. He looked down at the stones. "I was cruel," he whispered. "We all were. I don't expect you to forget." She studied him. Not his face, but the heaviness in his voice. She felt a strange tenderness, not for him, but for the girl she had been, the one who had walked away instead of letting hate take root in her heart. "I didn't come back to remember," she said quietly, "only to see what became of the place that shaped me." He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "You became more than any of us deserved." Her daughter squeezed her hand and whispered, "Mama, are we staying here long?" The woman looked around, at faces humbled, at memories softened by time, at the fountain where she once found the courage to pick up her scarf, at the bakery with its warm scent, at the sky widening above the village. "Just long enough," she said gently. "Long enough for the truth to return. Long enough for the village to see her clearly. Long enough for her daughter to understand the path her mother once walked alone." Her daughter grew tired of holding her hand and began to wander a few steps ahead, bouncing from one curiosity to another: the carved bench, the pigeons, the bright awnings near the grocer's shop. The woman let the child drift, always within reach, always under the gentle arc of her watchful gaze. She moved through the square as if walking through two realities at once: the present, warm with her daughter's laughter, and the past, still echoing faintly through doorways and windows. As she crossed toward the edge of the plaza, a voice called from behind her, "Wait, please." She turned slowly. A woman stood near the fountain, hands clasped tightly at her waist. The girl recognized her instantly, one of the older children from her school days, someone whose laughter had carved deep grooves into her memory. The woman stepped forward, her face pale, as though she had been rehearsing this moment for years. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "I've been thinking for a long time. If you ever came back, I would try. I would try to tell you that I'm sorry." The woman studying her felt an old emotion rise, not fear, but a distant ache, softened with time. The mother she had become, the woman who had traveled far and lived quietly, no longer flinched at the sight of old ghosts. "You don't have to," she answered calmly. The other woman shook her head. "I do. I should have been kind. I wasn't. I still don't understand why we acted the way we did." The girl she once was could have answered that. Fear disguised as cruelty, insecurity masquerading as confidence. But the woman she was now simply said, "We were children." The other woman swallowed hard. "You didn't deserve it." "No," she replied softly, "but I survived it." She turned toward her daughter, who was showing a flower to a passing dog. The child's laughter wrapped around the morning like a ribbon. She felt the village watching, everyone seeing, perhaps for the first time, how she carried herself now, slow, steady, sure. Not someone returning to reclaim the past, but someone arriving with a deeper glow of her own making. As her daughter ran back to her, babbling about the dog's soft ears, a small group gathered, not imposing, not surrounding her, but drawn by the quiet gravity of her presence. Some she recognized, others were younger, shaped by the stories their parents never told. A teenage girl stepped forward timidly. "My mother said you used to live here," she said. The woman nodded. "She also said that people weren't kind." The girl hesitated, lowering her gaze. "I don't want to be like that." The woman felt her throat tighten in a way she hadn't anticipated. She bent slightly so she was eye level with the girl. "Then you won't," she said. "It takes only one choice, one moment, one kindness." The girl nodded, her eyes shining faintly. She stepped back, holding onto her mother's hand with a new kind of determination. More people came. The grocer's wife, with her apron dusted in flour, the elderly man who fed the cats behind the cafe, a young mother carrying a baby on her hip. They gathered in a loose, hesitant circle, not to accuse, not to gossip, but because something in the air felt different. Something that invited confession without demand. "You helped us," someone said suddenly. The woman blinked. What?" "You helped us," the voice repeated. It came from a man standing behind the tailor's shop. He stepped forward, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "Years ago, during the big winter, packages arrived on doorsteps, bread, candles, medicines, no name, just small gifts. They helped us through." Her daughter tugged her sleeve, curious at the shift in tone. The woman held her hand gently and looked at the villagers. Their eyes were searching, not suspicious, but wide with a fragile understanding. "You sent them," the man said, his voice quiet. "Didn't you?" She didn't answer immediately. Her daughter leaned closer as if sensing that this moment held weight. The woman met the man's gaze calmly. "Some things are done because they must be," she said at last. "Not because names are needed." The baker stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. "There were letters too," she whispered, "encouraging ones, for people who were struggling, families having hard times. The handwriting was always the same." The woman said nothing. Her silence was neither a confession nor a denial. It was simply enough. The flower seller's eyes glistened. "That winter," she murmured, "someone paid the electricity bill for half the homes on the north side, quietly. No one knew how. No one expected it." A man who had once sneered at her in school now looked at the ground as if ashamed to stand at full height. "We thought it was the church," he admitted, "or the mayor, or some traveling charity." His voice cracked. "But it was you." The woman lowered her eyes toward her daughter, smoothing a stray curl behind her ear. "It wasn't about forgiveness," she said gently. "It was about giving what I had." Her daughter, hearing none of the deeper layers, smiled and wrapped an arm around her mother's waist. "Mama helps people," she announced proudly. The villagers grew quiet. In that silence, something shifted, not just in individuals, but in the square itself. The same stones once used to trip, shame, and isolate now held a different memory entirely. The man from the fountain, the one who once held up her scarf, stepped forward again, voice trembling like an apology, learning how to stand. "We didn't deserve your kindness." Her daughter looked between the adults, confused at the heaviness in the air. "Mama," she whispered, "why are they sad?" The woman knelt beside her, so they were face to face. She spoke softly, just for the child. "Sometimes," she murmured, "people remember things they wish they had done differently. That makes the heart feel heavy." The little girl nodded in the solemn way children do when they sense truth touching the edges of their understanding. She placed her small hands on her mother's cheeks and said, "Very seriously, you're not heavy, you're light." Tears pricked the woman's eyes, sudden, unbidden, but soft. She kissed her daughter's forehead and stood again, turning toward the villagers who had gathered. "I didn't come for apologies," she said, her voice steady, warm. "I didn't come to reopen old wounds. I came to show my daughter where I began, and to show her that we do not let others decide our worth." An older woman near the front pressed a hand to her heart. "You were always worth more than we knew." The woman nodded with gentle acceptance, not letting the words wash away the past, but allowing them to soften its edges. Her daughter tugged her sleeve once more. "Mama, can we see the house?" She breathed in the moment, the village watching, the sky bright, the fountain whispering, the square holding its quiet confession. Then she nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "Let's go home." They walked toward the lane where she once lived. The villagers parted as they passed, not out of fear or awe, but from a new understanding, a recognition of the light she carried and the shadow they had once cast. Her daughter's small hand swung between them, bright as the ribbon tied at the end of her braid. And for the first time, the woman felt the village shift from the place that hurt her into the place witnessing her return, not with shame, but with illumination. They walked slowly up the narrow lane, the woman guiding her daughter along the familiar stones. The pathway curved gently between small houses with faded shutters and flowering pots perched on ledges. Each step felt like a quiet heartbeat, an old rhythm returning, but softer now, transformed. Her daughter skipped ahead, stopping only when something caught her attention. A wooden birdhouse, a stray kitten, a window curtain moving with the breeze. The woman followed, letting the moment breathe. She hadn't expected this walk to feel so weightless. For years she had imagined returning only in memories, a place buried, not revisited. Yet here she was, holding a child whose laughter wrapped the village in threads of warmth. The weight she once carried on her shoulders had shifted entirely. It was not on her back anymore. It had dissolved into something gentler, like morning mist lit by the sun. They reached the small house she once called home. The door was the same dull blue, though chipped now, revealing layers of wood beneath the paint. The old garden still held stubborn marigolds, bright and cheerful despite seasons of neglect. Her daughter ran to the flowers immediately. "Mama, look! They're still growing!" Her voice rang out like a bell. The woman touched one of the marigolds, its petals soft, its scent mild but familiar. It felt almost symbolic, something that had survived harsh seasons and still open toward the light. She didn't knock. She merely stood there, absorbing the past and present folding into each other. Her fingertips brushed the doorframe, where once she had leaned while crying quietly, hoping the world outside would forget her just long enough for her pain to settle. Her daughter came running back, arms full of sunlit blooms. "Can we go inside?" she asked. "Not today, sweetheart," she murmured with a smile. "Today we're just remembering." A soft rustling came from behind her. When she turned, she found several villagers standing along the lane, not crowding, not pressing, simply watching with an expression she had never seen on their faces: humility, gratitude, something close to reverence, but not out of fear or awe, rather out of recognition. One stepped forward, the grocer's wife, her apron still speckled with flour, her hands trembling lightly. "I wanted to say, you changed more lives than you know," she said. "You kept us warm. You kept us fed. You kept some of us from giving up." The woman met her gaze, steady and kind. "You would have done the same," she replied gently. The grocer's wife shook her head. "I didn't, but you did. That's what matters." Another villager joined, the elderly man who had always fed stray cats. His voice cracked as he spoke. "When my daughter fell sick," he said, "someone left medicine in my mailbox. I could never afford it. I always wondered who cared enough." The woman felt her daughter lean against her leg, listening with wide eyes. "You never owed me gratitude," she replied. "I did what I could." An even deeper quiet settled over the lane. The villagers exchanged looks, some regretful, some hopeful, all changed. The school teacher from her childhood stepped closer. She had aged, lines deepened around her eyes, but those eyes now carried apology rather than authority. "I should have protected you," she whispered. "I failed you then. I'm sorry." The woman's chest tightened, not with anger but with unexpected compassion. She looked at her daughter, who watched the adult with innocent confusion. "We all learn," she said softly. "Some lessons take longer." The teacher nodded, tears gathering in her lashes. A teenage boy approached next, awkward and wringing his hands. "My mother said you used to live here," he mumbled. "She said people treated you badly. I don't want to be someone who hurts people like that. I want to be better." The woman knelt so her eyes met his. "You already are," she said, "as long as you choose kindness." The boy swallowed hard, relief softening his shoulders. Her daughter tugged her sleeve again, her voice delicate as a feather. "Mama," she whispered, "why are they saying sorry?" The woman brushed a curl from her daughter's forehead. "Because sometimes," she said gently, "people finally see what they didn't look at before." Her daughter looked at the villagers, small blue flowers still clutched in her hands. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and offered one to the school teacher. "It's okay," she said simply. "Flowers make people better." The school teacher's breath broke with a soft sound as she accepted the flower, holding it like something fragile and sacred. A hush rippled through the villagers, not from shock, but from something deeper. Recognition that the girl who once hid behind her mother's skirt had returned not with vengeance or bitterness, but with a child teaching forgiveness without ever knowing the weight of the word. The woman rose again, her grace quiet but unmistakable. She held her daughter's hand, ready to walk away from the lane with a peace she had never expected. But then the man from the fountain approached. His steps were unsure, his breath shallow. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, a scarf. The old one, faded and worn, edges frayed from years of being forgotten in a drawer. He held it carefully, as though offering a piece of a regretful past. "I didn't know why I kept it," he said. "Maybe because it reminded me of the worst thing I did. I should have returned it long ago." He swallowed. I'm sorry." The woman looked at the scarf, a relic of a day that once carved pain into her memory. She took it gently, folding it with the care she had learned through loss and healing. Her daughter brushed the fabric with her small fingers. "It's pretty," she said. "Can I carry it?" "Of course," the woman replied. The village seemed to exhale at once. Something had broken open, not loudly, not dramatically, but tenderly. A kind of collective forgiveness. A soft remembrance of what they had once been and what they could become. The woman turned toward them all. Her voice was quiet, but it carried like sunlight over water. "You owe me nothing," she said. "What matters is what you choose from here." The villagers nodded, some wiping tears, some holding their children closer. The woman took her daughter's hand, ready to continue walking. The lane behind her was no longer a path of shame, but a corridor of transformation. Her daughter hummed softly, twirling the scarf around her wrist like a ribbon. The sunlight glowed on the marigolds, warm and unwavering. As they reached the square once more, the villagers naturally parted, creating a walkway that led toward the center where the fountain shimmered. The woman paused there, feeling the air shift. Her daughter looked up, eyes bright, cheeks flushed from the climb. "Mama," she said with a smile that felt like pure dawn, "you lit up the whole village." The woman's eyes softened. "No, sweetheart, you did." She lifted her daughter into her arms. The ribboned scarf trailed behind like a strand of light. Around them, the villagers watched in silence, the morning growing warmer as though the village itself were breathing easier than it had in years. An old wound had been acknowledged, a truth had returned, and a light, carried quietly through miles and seasons, had finally come home. The woman walked forward, not away from her past, but through it, carrying its remade shape with grace. Her daughter rested her head on her shoulder, small hands clutching the scarf that once symbolized cruelty and now symbolized something entirely different. Kindness passed from mother to child. Forgiveness passed from child to village. Light passed from past to present. And as they stepped into the heart of the square, the woman understood that beauty had never been something to chase or earn or beg for. It had always been the quiet courage of choosing compassion, even when compassion was never offered to you. The village, watching her go, finally saw it. They had called the girl ugly, but she had returned, carrying the only light that truly changes a place. The light of a healed heart. The sun was rising gently over the hills beyond the village, casting a pale gold light that slipped through windows and stretched quietly across the square. The fountain murmured softly, as though speaking to itself. Early morning sounds drifted in, the shuffle of a shopkeeper lifting a shutter, the flap of birds settling on the rooftops, the faint hum of someone sweeping a doorstep. Life was beginning, ordinary and peaceful, yet marked by something new, something tender that lingered in the air. The woman stood at the edge of the square with her daughter beside her, watching the light change the color of the village stone by stone. Her daughter held the old scarf like a banner of triumph, the faded fabric trailing behind her in the breeze. The woman breathed in slowly, letting the crisp morning air settle into her chest. She could feel the village settling too, as though everyone were taking their first honest breath in years. She didn't feel like a stranger anymore. Her daughter spun in a small circle, letting the scarf flutter around her. A soft laugh escaped her lips, light, free, untouched by the heaviness that once haunted this place. The laughter drifted toward a nearby bench where an elderly woman sat, hands cupped around a warm mug as though drawing comfort from the sound. The woman walked her daughter to that bench. The elderly woman looked up in surprise, then in quiet gratitude. "Your child," the old woman said softly. "She brings light." The woman smiled. "Children see what we forget." The old woman nodded, eyes misting as she looked toward the lane where so many villagers had gathered the day before. "We forgot so much," she whispered. "We forgot kindness. We forgot to look beyond our own fears." The woman sat beside her, their knees almost touching. "You remember now," the old woman's voice trembled, "because you returned." Her daughter handed the old woman one of the marigolds she had picked earlier. The petals glowed like tiny suns in the morning light. The old woman pressed the flower to her chest as if absorbing some forgotten warmth. Across the square, the grocer's wife stepped outside, carrying 2 small loaves of fresh bread. She hesitated only a moment before walking toward them. She offered 1 loaf to the woman and another to her daughter, her hands still dusted with flour. "For your mourning," she murmured, "and for your child." The woman accepted the bread with gentle gratitude. Her daughter, delighted, hugged the warm loaf as though it were a gift from the sky. A few villagers passed nearby, moving along the cobblestones, their steps slower, more thoughtful. They nodded softly as they walked by, not with the forced politeness of strangers, but with the sincerity of people trying to rebuild something delicate and true. The woman's gaze drifted to the fountain. Its water glimmered with the pale reflection of the morning sky, and she felt something settle quietly inside her. A peace she hadn't known she still longed for. She rose from the bench and walked toward it with her daughter's hand in hers. She traced the rim of the fountain with her fingertips. She remembered standing here as a child, small and uncertain, avoiding the reflections in its water. Now she leaned over and looked into the rippling surface. Her face appeared, older, softer, no longer shadowed by shame or fear. Her daughter leaned beside her, their reflections merging into a single movement of light and color. "This place," her daughter said, "it looks different today." The woman nodded. "So do we." They stayed there for a moment, just breathing in the cool morning air. Then voices rose gently behind them, villagers greeting one another, parents guiding their children to school, the butcher calling out to open his shop, footsteps scattering across the cobblestones with familiar rhythm. The village was waking. And in that waking, something like forgiveness was taking root. The woman lifted her daughter into her arms. The child rested her head on her shoulder, the scarf dangling from her small hand like a thread tying present to past. They walked slowly across the square, the morning breeze brushing against them. As they passed the bakery, the door opened and the baker herself stepped out. She held a small paper bag. "For your journey later," she said softly. "Something sweet for both of you." The woman accepted the offering with quiet gratitude. The baker lingered for a moment, then whispered, "Thank you for coming back. Thank you for letting us see." The woman offered a gentle smile, then continued walking. She reached the far side of the square near the road leading out of the village. Her daughter wriggled down to the ground and tugged at her hand. "Mama," she asked, "are we going home now?" The woman looked down the road, then back toward the houses, the fountain, the marigolds, the villagers who had begun to gather in small clusters. She looked at her daughter's bright eyes, then at the scarf wrapped loosely around her tiny wrist. "Not yet," she said softly. "There's something I want to show you first." She led her daughter toward the small church at the edge of the village, where a wooden bench sat beneath a large fig tree. The branches stretched wide, casting dappled shadows on the ground. She had sat there many times as a child, crying, thinking, wishing. She sat on the bench now, with her daughter beside her. The fig leaves rustled gently overhead. "This is where I used to sit," she said quietly, "when I felt lonely, when people weren't kind." Her daughter pressed her palm against her mother's hand. "Are you lonely now?" The woman shook her head. "Not anymore." The child studied her carefully, then nodded with solemn satisfaction. The fig leaves swayed again, sunlight catching the edges. Memories fluttered through the woman's mind, not with pain, but with a clarity she had earned. She saw herself there years ago, small and frightened, trying to disappear. She saw the scarf being stolen, the mocking laughter echoing across the schoolyard, the way she had run to hide behind her mother's skirt. She saw the night her grandmother had pressed a kiss to her forehead and whispered, "Go and become who you are." She saw the long road she had walked since then, full of quiet work, of compassion, of rebuilding her own heart. She felt her daughter's hand squeezing hers. "Mama," the girl whispered, "can we come back again someday?" The woman looked at the tree, the bench, the village bathed in soft morning light. "Yes," she said, "someday." Her daughter's face brightened. She tugged on her mother's sleeve again. "When we come back, can I give more flowers to people?" "You can," the woman answered with a smile. "As many as you like." They stood and began walking slowly toward the road. The village watched quietly from a distance, some from windows, some from doorways, some from the square. They watched the woman and her daughter walking hand in hand, the old scarf trailing like a ribbon of remembrance. A breeze lifted the ends of the scarf, making it flutter like a small banner of peace. As they reached the end of the lane, the woman turned for one last look. She didn't see the house where she cried or the corners where she hid. She didn't see the children who mocked her or the shame she once carried. She saw a village learning how to love again. She saw a place where her daughter's laughter had softened old wounds. She saw marigolds blooming despite the seasons. She saw the truth that had traveled with her, quiet, unwavering, alive. She whispered, almost to herself, almost to the wind, when the world turned away, love remained. Her daughter leaned against her leg and whispered, "Mama, that's true." The woman picked her up, holding her close, letting the child's warmth rest against her heart. The scarf fell between them like a woven bridge connecting generations. Pain transformed into gentleness, harshness rewritten as grace. They took the first steps down the road, the morning stretching before them with promise. Behind them, the village exhaled, as if releasing years of unspoken regret. Before moving out of sight, the woman turned once more. The villagers who had gathered lifted their hands slightly, not waving, but acknowledging, honoring. She nodded in return. Then she walked on, her daughter's arms wrapped around her neck, the old scarf brushing softly against her cheek. It felt like a blessing. It felt like coming full circle. It felt like the world, at last, had learned to see her. And in that gentle, quiet glow, the village finally understood the meaning of beauty, kindness passed from mother to child, then back to the village that once turned away. Because when everything else fades, love is what remains. When the world turned away, love remained. If this story touched your heart, share it. Someone out there may need its light today. Stay with us for the next story, another moment of truth that may heal the heart.